Good evening. The name's Bond, Captain Goodspeed Bond, and welcome back to the channel. I'm Joe, if you're new around here, and it's been a very long time since I've released a video. Not for the want of wanting to do one, you know, I've really wanted to get this channel off the ground, but yeah. It hasn't happened for one reason or another, but we are here. So thank you very much if you have stuck about and you are tuning in today to this video. Thank you very much. If you haven't already, then click that subscribe button for hopefully some more Bond content. But today what we are talking about is the future of the franchise, and it's something that I, as a huge Bond fan, I'm really worried about, actually, and I think it all boils down to possibly one man, but definitely one moment in one film, and it was the very last moment of the final film of Daniel Craig's era, No Time to Die, and discussing whether killing Bond, has that in fact killed the franchise? And yeah, it's a question I've wrestled with ever since I watched it in 2021 at the cinema, and started that showing going, well, I've seen a lot of people say they might kill Bond off. Can't see that happening. That would be absolutely ridiculous. But as it so happened, in the last 10 minutes of No Time to Die, Bond sacrifices himself. He stands there and he lets the missiles hit him. He gives up because obviously Safin infects him with the nano droids, and he ends up feeling like he can't live anymore because his wife and not his wife, but his partner Madeline and his daughter Mathilde would be dead if he ever came into contact with them again, and he felt that, okay, there's no way for me to live anymore, and that was the end of that one. And of course it ends with "We have all the time in the world." It was a very disappointing end to what I thought up to that point was Daniel Craig's best Bond film, actually, and I'll talk a lot about Daniel Craig's tenure as Bond in this video, but I think it's fair to say that the creative decision to kill James Bond in that film has ultimately led to what will be the biggest hiatus in Bond films ever. Obviously, we had the 6-year hiatus between License to Kill and GoldenEye. But filming finished for No Time to Die back in 2019. We are now in 2024. We're 5.5 years after No Time to Die was originally meant to come out. Obviously, it was slated to come out in April 2020 when then COVID hit, and it was subsequently delayed to September 2021 when it did come out. So we're over 3 years from the release of the last Bond film, and we've not heard anything. Obviously, there was those famous 4 lines or 4 words at the end of No Time to Die: James Bond will return, but as yet that has not happened, and we've heard very little at all from anybody regarding a new Bond film. We obviously celebrated the 60th anniversary of Bond 2 years ago. All of the Bonds were shown again at the cinema, which I took advantage of a lot of that. Really enjoyed that, but we haven't heard anything about the future yet. We've had the 007 Road to a Million series, which I personally really enjoyed, but to call that a Bond series was pushing it a little bit. It had a little bit of Bond music. It had some of the Bond locations in there. But other than that, there was no mention of Bond in the entire show, and I'm hoping for season 2 that they turn that around, and there is a lot more Bond references in there. That would be really nice, and to have some Bond content. Of course, we've got Project 007, the new Bond video game that's been in development for multiple years, but that doesn't seem to be anywhere near release just yet. and we're absolutely nowhere on the film franchise. We haven't even had the widely expected 4K release of all of the Bond films. But I think, a lot of people agree with me that maybe the issue was killing Bond at the end of No Time to Die. But actually, I think you can track back a lot further than that to when perhaps they sealed their fate with Bond almost. And I think, quite honestly, it was the change in vibe to the Bond films that they went for following Die Another Day. I think back, I was a very young child when Die Another Day came out. But I remember all of the Bond merchandise and all of the Bond hype about the 40th anniversary Bond film. Looking back 20 plus years ago, it wasn't the best Bond film. I don't think it's anywhere near as bad as what other people make out. Certainly the first hour or so of the Bond of Die Another Day is up there with some of the best Bond has ever done, in my opinion. But at the time, I don't think that film was particularly badly received. Pierce Brosnan was very much celebrated as being Bond. He even remained in the part for James Bond Everything or Nothing, which was a game released a couple of years later, lended his voice acting to that. As far as he was concerned, he was going to be coming back for a 5th Bond film. And then all of a sudden they decided to go in a different direction, and they went for Blonde Bond, Daniel Craig. And of course, the reaction to that was not very positive at the time. But then came Casino Royale, and Casino Royale, to give it credit, is a great film. They went back to the roots of Fleming, and finally were able to make a film on Fleming's original material for James Bond, Casino Royale being the first book. And it wasn't an official film until 2006, and they made a great Bond film with Daniel Craig. It didn't have so many of the Bond elements in there. It didn't really have the Bond theme until the very end scene. It didn't have the gun barrel, of course. It didn't have the wit, the humour that you would normally associate with Bond. It certainly didn't have any gadgets. Q wasn't even in it. Moneypenny wasn't in it. There was a slight reference to it with I have the money, every penny of it, kind of a Moneypenny pun in there. But it wasn't necessary. When you look back at Casino Royale, as good a film as it might well be, how good a Bond film is it? And this is a very controversial opinion of mine. I know a lot of people think it's the best Bond film. But actually, when you think of a Bond film, most of us, I would imagine the formula of Bond. The classic cars, the classic Bond girls, the classic gadgets, the classic locations. And although you do have a decent amount of that in Casino Royale, really what makes it any different to a Jason Bourne film of the time, or a Die Hard movie that could come out in 2006, it was just an excellent action film. It had, of course, the drama and the wonderful story that is Casino Royale around it to help out the plot and help out the character development. But was it really a great Bond film? I'm not sure, and that's my opinion. But it was a good film. It was very well received. People really liked Daniel Craig in the role, and of course, they came back 2 years later and created Quantum of Solace, which was a direct follow-up to it. It's the first time that had ever happened in the Bond franchise that there had been direct continuity into the next film. Of course, we've had continual threads, recurring characters, and maybe sort of overarching storylines, if you like, of Blofeld and Spectre in general, particularly in those first films, and the idea that Bond is a widower, and is aging, I guess, towards the end of the Roger Moore films. But yeah, they obviously went for that direct sequel, and that was the first time they'd ever done that. And Quantum of Solace couldn't have been worse received, really. That came out, lots of people thought it was the worst Bond film ever. And you've got that real high and low of Daniel Craig already setting in after Quantum of Solace. And then there was obviously the financial crash of 2008. There was lots of issues around the ownership of Bond around about sort of 2008 onwards. And obviously Quantum of Solace itself had been born out of the writer's strike. So it's very interesting to me that you had that big fall from grace straight away for Daniel Craig from Casino Royale to Quantum of Solace. And then you've got this 4-year hiatus, and it comes back with Skyfall. And I remember back to the time, 2012, best year of my life, to be honest, with just everything that happened that year. It was a great Formula 1 season, for instance. You had the Olympic Games, it was Queen's Diamond Jubilee. It was just awesome. And obviously you had Skyfall. Everybody was proud to be British that year, and it was the 50th anniversary of Bond. Skyfall comes out, and everybody goes over the moon, or was over the moon about it. They absolutely loved the film. Bond is back at its best. Lots of people saying it's the best Bond film ever. Very much shades of Casino Royale, but almost took it to a whole new level because it had Q in there. It had a couple of gadgets. It had the DB5 back. It had an incredible story centered around M. It had a great villain. It had some great locations, and a lot of it was set in London and Scotland, and it felt like your agent was coming home, and I could certainly get behind that. However, controversial opinion from me again, when I went to the cinema to watch it, I actually left the cinema disappointed, and I feel a bit ashamed to say this because I wish I loved Skyfall as much as everybody else seems to. And don't get me wrong, Skyfall, for me, if I was to do a ranking, wouldn't be anywhere near the bottom. But there's some things that I have issues with. There's no gun barrel, for one, and that is really disappointing. It was the third Daniel Craig film, and by that point, I do feel like it should have been led by a gun barrel, and that would have elevated it massively for me. I know it sounds silly, but that one little bit just wasn't there. I also really don't like the fact he has his DB5. Up to that point, we were led to believe it was a reboot of the series. It's a very nice moment that they've put it in there. Don't get me wrong. It's a nice Easter egg. But it kind of makes no sense that this version of James Bond has the DB5. Because, it was rebooted in 2006. That was an origin story, if you like. He got his 00 status. Why would they give him a 1964 car for a with guns in it when Q says they don't do that anymore? It makes very little sense that he's a young agent in Quantum of Solace to be in an old and has-been agent who seems to have old cars that have gadgets in them by 2012. Now, this was fixed for a long time by the game 007 Legends, which again wasn't very well received. I thought it was alright, but it had this idea that when Bond is shot on the bridge and he falls down into the water, it had this idea they had all these flashbacks and to previous missions. And he did Moonraker, he did Goldfinger, he did On Her Majesty's Secret Service, he did License to Kill, he did Die Another Day, and then he was back at Skyfall. And that really, for me, felt like, okay, everything that Bond has done from 1962 to 2002 is captured within the time between 2008 and 2012. And all of sort of, you end up with the Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace being the first two films, prequels almost. Then you have Dr. No Up to Die Another Day, and then Skyfall comes in, and that is where you take over. That is why he's got the DB5 and all of that. But then, of course, they went and ruined that with Spectre and No Time to Die, which we'll talk about in a minute. But yeah, I came out of the cinema disappointed after Skyfall, and I was really sad. I wanted to like it. But for me, I think the ultimate problem with all of these films has been Daniel Craig. I've not been able to get away with Daniel Craig as being Bond, and I know he's a lot of people's favourite. He's actually my least favourite of any Bond. And I'll tell you why. It's the seriousness. I like my Bond to be a bit suave, to be a bit laid back, to be able to crack witty comments. And I think Daniel Craig learned how to do that, sort of Spectre onwards, funnily enough. And certainly in No Time to Die, I think he's completely at ease with the role. But I just feel like Daniel Craig is very uptight in the first three films and doesn't give a lot. Dare I say, he's quite a boring actor with it. And it does bring down those films for me. And I do hate to say it. I really do. Because I think Judi Dench is awesome. Ralph Fiennes is awesome as M when he comes in. And I actually like Naomi Harris and Ben Whishaw as Q and Moneypenny. Rory Kinnear as Bill Tanner. You know, there's some great characters in there. What really brings it down for me is Daniel Craig. However, we then go to Spectre 3 years later. Of course, they've got the rights to use Spectre. They go for it straight away. We know Blofeld's coming back, or we have a huge suspicion that that's going to be the case. Spectre's back as well. Really exciting for the future of Bond. And what do? They make Blofeld his brother. What were they thinking? You know, it's just actually such a stupid story to bring this character as Blofeld and call him your half-brother. It's such a cheap trick, because obviously people have wanted Blofeld back since, you know, he's not officially been in a Bond film since Diamonds Are Forever at this point. He's in For Your Eyes Only, but he's not named. They weren't allowed to name him Blofeld. And they've gone and made him his half-brother. Brofeld, if you like. And it feels very cheap. It feels stupid, to be completely honest with you. It feels stupid. However, when I left the cinema, I actually enjoyed Spectre. It's got a gun barrel, and it starts to have some of those humorous bits that Bond is known for. We've got that moment right at the start of the film where Daniel Craig falls down into a sofa, and that's hilarious. I laughed out loud at that. That felt like a real harkening back to the Roger Moore times. He's wearing a white tuxedo. There's some fantastic moments in there. You've got the music when he's in the old guy's car at some point. No, he's not. He's in his Aston Martin, but should have been for another age. And he puts on the music, and it's classical. It's hilarious. But then there's just these moments where Blofeld is actually Brofeld. We've got Madeline Swan, and he falls in love with Madeline Swan. And I kind of don't buy their romance. Mr. White returns, of course, and there's just so much potential with Spectre, but they just slightly missed the mark with it. But I actually thoroughly enjoyed that more than Skyfall, more than Casino Royale, even though it would now be much lower in my ranking after rewatching it. But at the time, I was like, that's Daniel Craig's best Bond film. Mainly because Daniel Craig was a lot better in it than in his previous Bond films, for me, anyway. And then, of course, you've got No Time to Die. And genuinely, I think the first 2 hours 30 minutes of that film is very good. There are some things I don't like. I don't like the fact that Madeline Swan is back. I didn't believe their relationship at the time. I absolutely love the bit at the start when James Bond goes to Vesper's grave. I thought that was awesome, and then he's ambushed. There's some great stunts in that first half an hour. It's really, really strong. And then you've got the bits after the the title sequence, and then some great action there. You've got some nice callbacks to On Her Majesty's Secret Service with the musical riffs in there as well. And to be quite honest with you, I really enjoyed it. It was a great ride. I hated the fact that Bond had a daughter. that didn't make sense. And then, of course, you've got Normie being the new 007, and that felt a little bit out of place to me. But I didn't hate that as much as everybody else seemed to. But it was a bit weird. And then you've got the ending. Bond is defeated ultimately. It's a real shame, because I came out of that cinema thinking, well, I'll never watch that film again. And to be fair, I've not sat and watched it ever since. I've obviously watched people's reviews of it. I've seen bits and pieces from the film, but I've not actually sat down and watched No Time to Die again, because I know what's coming. I don't want to see Bond be defeated. That's not, for me, what Bond's about. And I think that moment where they've killed Bond off has unfortunately killed the franchise, certainly for now. Do I think it'll be back? Yes. Do I think it'll be weird when it's back? Very much so. So many people have spoken to me and said, well, how's he going to come back? How is Bond going to come back? He's dead. Is James Bond a codename? Those people that think James Bond's a codename are coming out and they're going to go, see? It was a codename all along. Which it wasn't, by the way. They've got there's some rumours that they've got this idea of doing a period James Bond, keeping faithful to the books. I just don't subscribe to that. When the Bond films originally came out, yes, they used titles from the books, but actually they didn't even do them at the time, and it would have made more sense at the time to do it in line faithfully to the books. They were creative. They took elements of the story and they made fantastic action films. And certainly for the first 20 Bond films, that was successful. I don't really know why people feel the need to have this story development, have this character development. Just have a 2.5 hour action extravaganza with humour in there, with great locations, with great weapons, great gadgets, and a great Bond who looks good. And every man, possibly every woman in the cinema looking at that guy wants to be him. Think he's the coolest guy in the world. Yes, he's an absolute idiot sometimes. He's not a very nice person sometimes. Yes, he comes out with silly comments. He does silly things, but he gets the job done. And at the end of the day, you can come out of that cinema and you can have your shoulders high and you can think, yes, that was a great film. I enjoyed that. Good overcomes evil. Happy days. And we can move on and we can look forward to the next one in a couple of years. And you can bring some characters back. You can bring some cars back. But you don't need to bring story continuity into it. You don't need to bring Brofeld into it. You don't need to bring daughters into it. And if you are going to do that, you plan it at the start. You don't just keep chopping and changing your mind. When they made Skyfall, in no way were they expecting to be bringing back Blofeld in Spectre and him somehow being the orchestrator of all of James Bond's pain in Casino Royale and no, they didn't. You know, at the end of Quantum of Solace, we were finding out about this mystery quantum organization. Skyfall brought back the one-off Bond film idea, and then they went and ruined it and tried to bring all 5 Bond films together from the Daniel Craig era, and that's why it didn't quite work for me. It didn't make sense all of the time, and I'm really done with Bond being a washed-up agent. Bond, even at the age of 58 in A View to a Kill, overcame evil, and he did it with betting the girl that was 20 years younger than him. He was able to do it, and I think that's what we need to go back to. We don't need this character development. Leave that to TV series. Leave that to somebody else. Bond is Bond. Bond is pretty much a superhero. He shouldn't be killed. He should just be able to save the day. And you know what you're going to get. You're going to get an incredible 2-hour action thriller with some great stunts, great lines, great cars, great outfits, great locations. And that's what it should be. But No Time to Die, I think, has thrown that into jeopardy. So that is my little 26-minute thoughts about Bond 25 and that particular moment with James Bond dying, how that might well have killed the franchise. But actually it went back further, and I think maybe it was the Daniel Craig era that has killed the franchise, because when you start to do character journeys and story arcs and this, that and the other, then you run out of ideas quickly because you back yourself into a corner with it all. You're constrained by this idea that you need to connect everything together, and you don't have to. You can have some plot holes here and there, but let's just get back to standalone Bond films, please. Doesn't need to be a period drama. Just make them like they did in the 90s. They're up to date enough, and yeah, that's what I would be doing. I think I would be making them based off the games by now. There's plenty of games out there that have got some great stories. That gets you another 5-6 Bond films straight away that you can create, and then hopefully you get some more ideas to really pull off some great action movies going forward. But anyway, that is that. I thought I'd just turn on the camera, have a little chat to you, rant a little bit about Daniel Craig. But yes, basically breaking the ice of coming back to this channel, and there is plenty more to look forward to. We'll be doing our in-depth reviews, we'll be doing our rankings from worst to best as well, and you've got plenty more to enjoy in the future. I really hope so. But let me know your thoughts about the Daniel Craig era down in the comment section. I know I've said a lot of controversial things, but I promise you, those are my opinions. Those are what I think, and that's why I think Bond is currently in its dormant state. But leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, and without further ado, goodbye, Mr. Bond.